The first thing I saw that morning was a brand new steel gate blocking the road my family had used for more than 40 years. No warning, no conversation, no knock on my door. Just a heavy metal barrier sitting there like someone had decided they could rewrite my entire life with a padlock and a sign. My name is Ethan Walker, and I have been farming the same 80 acres outside Cedar Hollow, Iowa, since I was old enough to follow my father around the fields. This land belonged to my grandfather before me, and he bought it back in 1954 when this area was nothing but open fields, gravel roads, and hard-working families trying to make a living. Back then, nobody cared about luxury views or property values. People cared about rain arriving on time, tractors starting in the morning, and whether the harvest would carry them through another winter. I grew up with that mindset. You take care of the land, and the land takes care of you. The old farm road they blocked was not some random dirt path. It was the road I had driven since I was a kid. It connected my main property to the back 30 acres where I kept equipment, checked fields, moved supplies, and handled the daily work that came with running a farm. During planting season, harvest season, or a storm coming in, that road was the difference between getting the job done and falling behind. But to Marcus Caldwell, the president of Willow Creek Estates HOA, it was just an eyesore that stood between his neighborhood and the perfect image he wanted to create. Marcus had moved into the area 2 years earlier after selling his technology company. He was smart, successful, and clearly used to getting things done his way. He drove a brand new luxury SUV, wore expensive clothes, and always talked like every problem could be solved in a conference room. When he became HOA president, he started pushing changes almost immediately. New landscaping rules, new community standards, new restrictions. His favorite phrase was always the same: we have to protect the value of the community. And I never had a problem with people wanting their homes to look nice. I understood that. But somewhere along the way, protecting property values turned into controlling everything around them. Willow Creek Estates was beautiful. I will give them that. There were 165 large homes, perfectly trimmed lawns, decorative ponds, a small private golf area, and more electric cars parked in driveways than I had ever seen in one place. But there was something funny about the whole thing. These people had moved to the countryside because they liked the peace, the open space, and the views of the fields. Then they started acting like the farming was the thing that did not belong. I remember the morning I walked up to that gate. The air was cool, the kind of Iowa morning where you can smell the soil before the sun even comes up. I put my hand on the metal barrier and just stood there for a moment. I was not angry at first. I was confused. I kept thinking there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe someone made a mistake. Maybe Marcus did not realize what this road was. Then I saw the sign, private HOA property. Below it was the HOA seal and Marcus Caldwell's signature. That was the moment my confusion turned into something else. I drove straight to the HOA office. Marcus was there, sitting behind a large desk, looking completely calm, almost too calm. I asked him why the road was blocked. He leaned back and said, "Ethan, this is a safety and community access decision. The HOA has decided this road will no longer be used as a public passage." I stared at him because I could not believe what I was hearing. I said, "Public passage? Marcus, this is my farm access road. My family has been using it since before your neighborhood existed." He smiled slightly and said, "Times change. Communities change." I remember those words because they told me everything I needed to know. To him, this was not about a road. It was about who had power. He saw a farmer on the edge of his development. I saw someone trying to erase a piece of my family's history. I asked if we could find a compromise. Maybe a shared agreement. Maybe a scheduled access arrangement. Anything reasonable. But Marcus had already made up his mind. He told me the decision was final. What he did not understand was that the gate did not just block a road. It changed the way I worked every single day. The new route added 8 miles to every trip. My tractor had to travel farther. My equipment took longer to move. Every morning became a calculation of wasted time and wasted fuel. After the first month, I had spent an extra $4,600 just trying to do the same work I had done for decades. But the money was not what bothered me most. It was the feeling that someone who had just arrived believed they had the right to tell me how I could use the land my family built a life on. I could have lost my temper. I could have gone down there and caused a scene. Believe me, there were moments when I wanted to. But my father always told me something that stuck with me. He said, "When someone wants you to fight on their terms, do not give them that advantage." Make sure you understand the ground you are standing on first. So instead of yelling, I started researching. I pulled out old county records, property documents, agricultural registrations, and every piece of paperwork my family had saved over the years. I spent nights at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee getting colder beside me, reading every line carefully. And then I found something Marcus and the HOA had completely overlooked. My farm was not just a piece of property sitting next to their neighborhood. It was a protected agriculture operation with rights that existed long before Willow Creek Estates ever appeared on the map. The more I learned, the more I realized one thing. They thought they had closed my road. They had no idea they had just opened a much bigger fight. I spent the next several days doing something Marcus Caldwell probably never expected from me. I did not argue with him. I did not show up at HOA meetings yelling. I did not threaten anyone. I simply learned everything I could about my own rights. The more I researched, the clearer the picture became. My farm was not some empty piece of land waiting for a luxury development to decide what belonged there. It was an active agricultural operation that had been there for generations. The county record showed my property was registered as agricultural land long before Willow Creek Estates was even a blueprint. The laws were designed specifically to protect farmers from situations exactly like this, where people moved next to existing farms and then complained about the normal realities of rural life. I remember sitting in my old pickup truck one afternoon looking across the fields, watching the wind move through the corn rows, and thinking about how strange the whole thing was. For decades, nobody cared about this land. Nobody wanted to know who maintained the roads, who fixed the fences, or who woke up before sunrise to keep everything running. But the moment expensive houses appeared on the hill, suddenly my way of life became a problem. That was when I decided I was done defending myself. I was going to use the same system they tried to use against me. I called an agricultural consultant named Ray Bennett, a guy who had worked with farmers across Iowa for more than 30 years. I showed him the documents, the blocked road, the HOA letters, everything. He looked over the paperwork quietly for a few minutes, then leaned back in his chair and said, "Ethan, I think these people made one very expensive mistake." I asked him what he meant. He tapped the folder and said, "They thought they were forcing you to shrink, but legally, they may have given you the perfect reason to expand." That sentence changed everything. My farm had always been focused on crops, corn, soybeans, equipment work, the normal cycle of Iowa farming. But my remaining acreage had always had the potential for livestock. The law allowed me to expand operations as long as I followed the requirements. The more I studied the regulations, the more obvious it became. Willow Creek Estates had built their dream homes next to my existing farm. They did not buy the farm. They did not create the countryside. They moved into it, and now they wanted me to change because their expectations did not match reality. So I filed the proper paperwork. No tricks, no shortcuts, no hidden moves. Everything was documented and approved through the correct channels. My plan was simple: 4 livestock barns, each designed for 125 hogs, bringing the total operation to 500 animals. I knew exactly what I was doing. I also knew exactly where I would place the barns. The location met the legal requirements, sitting well within my property boundaries and positioned away from restricted areas. It was not revenge in the way people imagine revenge. I was not trying to hurt anyone. I was proving a point. If they wanted to force me to respect the rules, then I would follow every single rule and show them what those rules actually protected. When the first construction crews arrived, the neighborhood noticed immediately. At first, they thought maybe I was bluffing. Maybe I was just trying to scare them into removing the gate. Then the first barn went up, then the second, then the third. Suddenly, the people who had ignored my complaints were standing at their windows watching my operation grow. I remember seeing Marcus drive past slowly one morning. He stopped his Porsche near the entrance of his neighborhood and stared toward my property. For the first time since this whole thing started, he did not look confident. He looked worried. A few days later, he came to my driveway again. This time, he was not holding a folder. He was not wearing that business smile. He looked frustrated. He said, "Ethan, you cannot seriously be doing this." I looked at him and asked, "Doing what? Farming?" He shook his head and said, "You know exactly what I mean. This is going to affect everyone here." I nodded and said, "Marcus, the road affected everyone here too. You just did not care when it was affecting me." He tried to explain that the HOA was trying to protect the community. I told him protecting a community does not mean pretending the people around you do not exist. He stood there quietly for a moment because he knew there was no easy answer. The truth was uncomfortable. They wanted the beauty of rural Iowa without the reality behind it. They wanted the sunset over the fields, but not the work that created those fields. As the weeks passed, the new operation became fully active, and then came the part nobody in Willow Creek Estates wanted to admit they had underestimated. Farming has a presence. It has sounds, movement, and yes, sometimes smells. Early one morning around 5 o'clock, I was already working when I saw lights turning on across the neighborhood. Kitchen lights, bedroom lights, porch lights. People were waking up and realizing that their peaceful country view came with a neighbor who actually worked the land. By the fourth week, complaints started flooding into the HOA office. Residents who once ignored me were suddenly very interested in my farm. They complained about the operation, about the changes, about everything they believed should not exist beside their homes. Marcus called an emergency HOA meeting. Nearly 90 homeowners showed up. They were angry, frustrated, and looking for someone to blame. But this time, the person standing in front of them was not a powerless farmer asking for help. It was the farmer they had underestimated. I walked into that meeting carrying a folder of my own, and inside that folder was the one thing they never expected to see: a bill. The room went silent when I placed that folder on the table. For weeks, everyone in Willow Creek Estates had been talking about my farm, my animals, my operation, and how they believed I was the problem. But that night, for the first time, I wanted them to look at what started all of this. I wanted them to see the other side of the story. Marcus Caldwell looked at the folder sitting in front of him, and I could tell by his expression that he was already uncomfortable. He had walked into that meeting expecting me to apologize, maybe even asking for permission to continue farming on my own land. Instead, I was standing there with documents, numbers, and a timeline showing exactly how the situation happened. I opened the folder slowly and placed each page on the table. The first page showed the additional fuel costs caused by the blocked road. The second showed the hours of lost productivity, the missed work, and the delays that came from driving heavy equipment miles out of the way. The third showed the estimated cost of repairing and restoring the original access route. And the final page showed the cost of creating a completely new farm access road if they refused to restore the one they blocked. The total was $118,400, along with a monthly access agreement to guarantee unrestricted agricultural access. Marcus looked at the number and shook his head. He said, "Ethan, this is ridiculous. You're seriously trying to bill the HOA because you chose to expand your operation?" I looked at him and said, "Marcus, I did not choose to create this situation. You did." The room became uncomfortable after that, because everyone there knew the truth was not as simple as they wanted it to be. They wanted to talk about the smell. They wanted to talk about the inconvenience. They wanted to talk about how my farm affected their lifestyle. But they did not want to talk about the gate, the decision they made without speaking to me, or the fact that they disrupted the way I had worked for decades. I told them something I had been thinking about since the first day I saw that barrier across my road. I said, "You moved next to a farm and then acted surprised when you found out there was a farm here." Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. Because sometimes the truth is uncomfortable precisely because it is simple. My family was not the new arrival. We were not the ones changing the neighborhood. We were the reason the neighborhood existed in that location in the first place. The HOA attorney spent the next week reviewing everything. At first, they believed they had control because they had a board, rules, and enough homeowners to vote on decisions. But they quickly discovered something important. A community association has authority, but it does not have unlimited power. They could create rules for their neighborhood, but they could not erase history, property rights, or existing agricultural protections. 9 days later, we sat down again. But this time, the tone was completely different. There were no accusations, no angry speeches, no demands, just people realizing that this situation had gone much further than anyone expected. The agreement was simple. The gate would come down permanently. The road would be repaired to handle farm equipment. My access would remain unrestricted. The HOA would cover the financial losses caused by their decision, and we would move forward. I remember driving home that evening and stopping at the old road entrance. The gate was still there at that moment, but I knew it would not be there much longer. I shut off the truck, stepped outside, and just stood there for a minute. It was strange because I had driven that road thousands of times, but that night it felt different. It was not just a dirt road anymore. It represented something bigger. It represented the idea that people should not be pushed aside simply because someone else has more money, more influence, or a nicer neighborhood sign. Over the next few months, things changed at Willow Creek Estates. Marcus eventually resigned as HOA president. Some residents were embarrassed by how quickly the situation escalated. Others were still angry and believed I should have handled everything differently. I heard people say I was too aggressive. I heard people say I should have compromised earlier. And honestly, I understand why some people saw it that way. Nobody wants conflict with their neighbors. I never wanted that either. I would have preferred one simple conversation on day one. I would have preferred Marcus walking down my driveway and saying, "Hey, we have concerns. Can we find a solution together?" But that conversation never happened. Instead, they chose a gate. They chose paperwork. They chose control before communication. And sometimes when people choose a fight for you, you have to decide how you are going to respond. The biggest lesson I learned from everything was not about farming, money, or even the HOA. It was about assumptions. People looked at me and saw an old farmer who could be ignored. They looked at my land and saw empty space. They looked at a dirt road and saw something replaceable. They forgot that every piece of land has a story. Every property line has a history. Every family that works the land has sacrificed something to keep it alive. Today, my farm is back to normal. The fields still grow. The tractors still run before sunrise. The old red barn still stands where my grandfather built it decades ago. And yes, the road is open again. I still wave at some of the neighbors when I pass by. Some wave back. Some still do not. That is okay. Not every disagreement ends with everyone becoming friends. Sometimes success is simply being able to live your life without someone else deciding that your way of living does not belong. And maybe that is the real lesson here. Progress does not mean forgetting the people who are already there. A beautiful neighborhood should not require destroying someone else's way of life. A peaceful community should not be built on ignoring the voices around it. So I want to know what you think. Was I right to stand my ground and use every legal option available? Or do you think I should have found another way? If you have ever dealt with a neighborhood dispute, a property battle, or a situation where someone tried to push you around, share your story in the comments. I want to hear where you stand. Because these conversations are not really about farms or fences. They are about respect, fairness, and whether ordinary people still have the right to protect what they built. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more real-life battles where everyday people fight for their homes, their land, and their dignity.